So thank you very much. It's a delight to be here, and I'd like to thank Ludger Brummer and the team here at ZKM for inviting me here for inSonic. It's been an inspiring time already. So I'm going to start today by briefly introducing the background to virtual reality projects that we've been developing over the last 3 or 4 years, and then move on to talk briefly about the project that I will make, which will be a full concert work using virtual reality headsets as well, next year between IRCAM and here at ZKM. So the first project that started all this for me was the Listen project, and you may have seen us with some headsets out here between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock today showing some of this virtual reality. This project, the Listen project, started in 2013, and it was really about building communities of listeners across the southwest of the USA. I'm based in Arizona at Arizona State University. And it had within it several research focuses. And you can see here some of them. And you'll see here these research focuses of community engagement, and up here wellness and aged care. And the virtual reality work that we've been doing fits really well across both of these. The project engages volunteers in the communities who go out and make recordings every month in the same location. And so we've been building a large database, and hopefully the sound is, whoops, I just turned the whole thing off. That's not going to work very well, is it? All right. Yes. And so here, sorry about the image quality. Here you can hear some yellow frogs in Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park recorded by one of our volunteers. And so they have a database where they can upload these recordings and build a kind of community engagement in both listening and documenting the quality of the environment. All of the recordings that we're making in this project for the last 4 years now are ambisonic recordings. So when I go out, they're recorded using Soundfield A format, but we also joined a Kickstarter project some years ago in 2015 for the Brahma microphones, and you can see here a Zoom H2N, familiar to many of you, and if you look carefully there, you'll see an A format microphone inserted in there. So that means that all of our volunteers are also recording ambisonic A format files for us, and this is very important because not only does it give them a range of creative options with that material, but it allows us to analyze transformation within the environment, anywhere in the environment. Whereas if we were making stereo recordings in the environment, we may in fact be documenting the sound of the environment over here when the principal transformation of that environment over time takes place over here, and then we don't have any of that work. All of these recordings are put up online and available to all of you to listen to. And furthermore, because I have some very loyal undergraduate students, they're all listened to and documented and tagged, so you can search the database, and it becomes a useful functional tool as well to listen to, for instance, birds across a range of different sites in the US, in Mexico, and in fact with our partner here, Cornelis Popel, here in Germany. And you can see here, in fact, a recording made by Andreas Uhl here in Ansbach Hochschule. So it's great to have them on board, and we'll be expanding the range of environments here in Germany and in Europe. So to get onto the virtual reality side of this, is a project called EcoRift. And it first started when I joined the Kickstarter for the Oculus headset, and when it finally arrived at my house and I plugged it all in and put it on, probably like everybody else who did that at the time, and in fact still many people who I put in virtual reality today, I looked around and just went, what? This is like amazing. and it struck me, several things struck me at that time. One was that I could be absolutely stationary in that environment, and this was just for those of you who've looked around the kind of Tuscan house example that came with the first Oculus. you could be just stationary and just be present. And I thought this was an extraordinary thing, that one could just be present somewhere, that you didn't have to go anywhere, you didn't have to do anything, you could just be present there. And it also struck me immediately, because I'd been working with ambisonics for many years already at that point, that ambisonics and 3D auditory fields within that domain would be extremely powerful. Of course, at the time, it was extremely challenging to build these environments, and we had to build them all in C++, and we had to build our own decoders, and it took a long time. But nevertheless, we built some environments across the southwest of the US, and we launched it first here at South by Southwest Eco in the US in 2014. And the project got established with really three principal objectives. And those objectives were to promote the national parks and nature preserves across the US, and to really take those out to people. We wanted to really build community engagement in environmental issues, and particularly climate change. And one of the principal reasons for building communities of listeners is that actually listening is a really simple way and a powerful way to engage with the environment. And many people don't know how to engage with climate change. It's just way too big. And sitting down and just being in your environment and just listening to it actually re-centers you and gives you an enormous amount of power about acting to engage that environment and protect that environment. And we wanted to really democratise access, because when you think about national parks and nature preserves, really you have to be in a privileged position to be able to go out there, to have transport, to have the funds, to have the camping equipment, etc., etc. And this is simply not available to many people. And then, of course, if we're really going to change the way we address the environment and live on the planet, we need to engage young people in thinking about that now. And this has turned out to be an extraordinarily powerful way of engaging those people, as you can see right here. And we've had thousands of kids in these environments, and they're just like ducks to water. They totally love it, and they're like, where is that? I want to go there. That's amazing, and so on. Our third application is in the area of health and well-being, and we've been running a range of experiments in aged care homes, looking at wellbeing metrics, long-term wellbeing metrics, by exposing aged people to being in nature through virtual reality. And we're about to start a project or two projects in Arizona, looking at post-surgical hospital recovery rates, because it's well documented that if you can have a window and you can see greenery after a surgery in a hospital, your recovery rate is expedited substantially. And interestingly, recently an agency in the city came to us and asked us whether we might use some of our nature experiences in drug rehabilitation, and perhaps even in recentering and directing kind of directed attention exercises with homeless people. So we're about to start some of those projects. Now, in order to meet these objectives that I've just outlined, we really needed an easy way to build these tools and to distribute them. And of course, we wanted to leverage, ubiquitous smartphone technologies. And really, if we're talking about democratization, it can't be only on a $1,000 headset that needs a particular computer and so on. And so the most flexible way to do this was really to use the gaming engines, Unity, 3D and Unreal. And so in 2014, we actually teamed up with Blue Ripple Sound in the UK and became alpha testers and C# script and Unity integration team for their ambisonic decoders. And what that's given us is a broad hardware support which is scalable in terms of quality and can be adapted to a range of devices, and an internal higher order ambisonic bus which is scalable from first to fifth order ambisonics on a smartphone, and a 3D spatial reverb which has directivity controls and occlusion controls and so on. And actually, I personally have not used that in a project yet. And so how we build these scenes, which you can experience tomorrow between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock right outside, is to go and make ambisonic recordings in these environments. I then take about 72 photographs, which I stitch together into a photographic panorama. And then we we make a game material out of the photographic content and attach to that a 3D ambisonic audio bed. And then we attach to the camera a 3D audio listener, which means that we automatically get a point of view for spatial and visual content as the user moves through the scene, and then the audio is decoded using a binaural decoding for headphones. Now, I wanted to share with you, because that's all very kind of pragmatic and basic stuff, but I wanted to share with you a couple of thoughts and lessons that we've learned here. So one is that spatial audio is really central to the experience of being present in a place. And on the one hand, that seems really obvious, but when you put it in virtual reality experience, and if the ambisonic recording is made well, it really positions people. And people start to really hear the three-dimensional cues around them, and they're aware of a kind of context and a positional location that they're occupying. So those 3D audio cues also give you a sense of scale and context for the visual domain, and I've found when I've mismatched those, both accidentally and intentionally, that it's a real shock to viewers, that it just doesn't work for them, and they're kind of nowhere. I've also found that with good 3D audio, a kind of sense fusion takes place. So in one of the scenes that we have, you can clearly hear a crow flying across the sky in front of you. And many people say to me, "Oh yeah, I see the bird." Now, I know, because I took the photographs and made the recording, that the birds are not in the photographs, and I know that it's a still photographic environment that you're looking at, so you're not going to see a bird flying across the sky. And even with friends, when I say there is no bird, you don't see the bird, they're like, no, seriously, I see the bird flying across the sky. And I think that's super interesting that we have the ability. It's also, of course, suggests an extraordinary range of creative work for us to engage in, where we can kind of fuse and tease the senses to perceive things that are actually not there. Now, of course, we do this every day, and we construct our reality through putting all these things together. But in these instances in virtual reality, that becomes really explicit and an interesting point for us to manipulate. Now, the production challenges, to share with you some pragmatic things. First order ambisonics, of course, has a kind of coarse localization. Works quite well in these situations, but still it's a little coarse in some situations, particularly if you have animals or other sources that are quite close. So third order ambisonics, of course, gives us a much smoother spatial experience and much better localization. However, if we put that on the Gear VR on a Samsung headphone, even the more modern S8s, for instance, third order will overheat the phone in about 30 to 40 minutes. So it brings us back to the reality as developers of thinking about how do we need to deal with the assets and the resources that we have available. In addition, within the environments you can see out here, you can go to different environments just by looking. And then, of course, if you transport yourself to a different location, load times have to be really optimized. And so then scene changes can't allow you to load large files into memory. And so one has to really think about how to stream assets and load the panoramas quickly enough so there's no perceived latency, but nevertheless within the capacity of the device that you're using. Now, the other thing, of course, is interfaces, and so we wanted people to be able to transport themselves to a range of places, and within the EcoRift environment, we have about 20 environments across the southwest, in rainforest preserves in Mexico, in Germany, hopefully soon in Chile. We want this to be an extensible framework, and so we really thought about interfacing that would allow you to transport yourself whenever you're ready to another place. Each of the environments that we have a sound file that loops over about 20 minutes. So you can be in these environments for quite a long time. It's not that you have to go somewhere. And so we've developed an interface that uses gaze. Simply by looking at a map and looking at a pointer on the map allows you to be transported into that location, and then a simple gaze-based interface menu that allows you to come out into a new place and so on. Of course, then when we started looking at aged care homes, people in hospital beds and so on, they have a very limited range of mobility, and the gaze mechanism that we use to bring up the menu is to look down at the ground, and they couldn't do that. So we've implemented hand controls so that they can actually either automatically put themselves on a journey or scroll from environment to environment rather than using the gaze. Now, the other thing I wanted to touch on here is that I'm always really interested, throughout my years of working in technology, not really in technology, but to ask myself, what are inherent properties in this tool that allow me to achieve outcomes that I couldn't achieve with a previous tool, with an existing tool, for instance, right? If we could generate the same experience for you with pen and paper or pencil and paper, then we should just use pencil and paper, right? But so what are the inherent properties and what can I do here? And I would say, to go back to an earlier point in my talk, that being really, truly present is possible in virtual reality, and that if you come and just sit in our environmental VR spaces, people report being quite really truly present there. And one of the things that I've observed just by watching people is that they put the headset on and so on, and then almost instantaneously their whole torso just kind of relaxes. And you can see that the effect on the body of being present in that location is, I won't say the same, but an equivalent to the experience you would have if you went out and sat there. Equally, what's really interesting to me in these environments is that it's possible to actively listen. So you can really listen into the world and around the world in which you're inhabiting. And so this process of being present, of course, involves a process of actively listening. And the other is that you have an embodied experience, that there's it kind of lends an empathy to the context that you're observing. And so, of course, in terms of developing appreciation, for instance, for natural environments, that has proved to be quite successful. I personally would suggest that thinking about these inherent properties, it seems to suggest to me that I should avoid tasks. If I give you a task to do in the world, then I take you away from the sense of being present, and I take you away from these kind of more meditative points of engaging through active listening and so on. And so I would avoid that. As I say, you can see these again tomorrow between 1 and 3 out here. Now to move on to talk about Future Perfect, which is the work that I'll make between IRCAM and ZKM next year. I'm of course very honoured to have received a 2018 Artistic Research Residency and super looking forward to this project. It's going to be a large concert work using smartphone virtual reality technologies and ambisonic and wavefield sound diffusion, and I'll just unpack that a little bit for you. So I'd like to start just by quoting a short sentence from my proposal, which says that Future Perfect explores the seam between virtual reality as a documentation format for environmental research and archiving nature, and combines the thoughts of nature as we know it may, in the near future, only exist in virtual reality archives. And that the notion of the virtual as a hyper-real imaginative world contained by both a technological or technical mediation can present to the individual a private experience in a communal place. So Future Perfect is a performance that will allow you to have your own individual point of view in the work, but it's also an interactive crowd mapping project. We will develop smartphone beacon tracking technologies that will generate a personal journey through the work. You'll be able to walk around in the work. And so each member will be part of a community, having an individual and communal experience simultaneously. So of course we'll use wavefield techniques which will allow me to have sonic objects that can come to people, follow them through the space, and be exchanged between people in the space. And we'll use higher order ambisonics for its immersive properties of being, immersed in a space, and all of this will take place over a speaker array rather than binaurally through headphones. We'll use smartphone tracking systems, both as a beacon and proximity to points, so that we can track individuals through the space. And then we'll use that data to create 3D sound fields as people can move through that sound field, but also have influence upon it. The material will the visual material will consist of 360-degree VR video footage shot in nature reserves here in Karlsruhe and in Paris, Paris and Karlsruhe, and ambisonic recordings made at the same time in those same locations. But in addition to that, there will be an animation layer which will be developed, or is developed from environmental objects, and you can see a little bit of that, some of the experiments I've been doing for that here. And then, because we'll be tracking each individual, we'll be able to draw vector lines between individuals in the concert space as they move, based, for instance, on vectors of speed of movement, direction of movement, and so on. And this is in part to encourage a collective consciousness of the individuals within the work as a community, rather than simply an individual concert goer. And then in addition to that, there'll be a frame differencing layer which will allow you to see just little shadows of other individuals, because of course if I ask you to put a virtual reality headset on with 100 other people and walk around a room in a concert, that's going to be a disaster, right? So you need to be able to see where the other person is, but not in the sense of an augmented reality, simply as simple an outline as is possible. So I can show you, in that animation world, here, for instance. Can I pull the sound out? Yep. Thank you. So you can see that I've been building this. Let's get rid of that. So if you imagine this is on your head, right, and you're turning around, looking through this world, you can see that this kind of grows around you, in a range of different ways, and disappears into different vortices in the space. And so if you could imagine this as just one layer that's woven into the VR footage, and will be accompanied not only by the field recordings, but by a composition work that I'll be composing here, which will also be partly driven by the tracking of people throughout the space. And what's cool by this, actually, it's also on a headset outside. Let me see, where's everything disappeared to? Over there. One of the things that I've been finding interesting developing this is this idea that you see these abstract forms, but then you can follow their movement and transition through the space. So I think there's a lot of interesting creative work to be done here, and I'm excited to start work on that. That's all that I wanted to present to you today, but just very quickly, because Matthias's talk brought up a range of questions that we've also been thinking about. The other thing that we can show outside is a virtual reality concert of Monteverdi that we recorded 12 months ago in New York in an amazing church. And we've written a framework for that so that we can put any number of people into that concert in Gear VR headsets simultaneously and synchronously run the concert for them, and then track where they're all looking, and then do post-analysis between where their attention is drawn and, for instance, to what extent that's synchronized to musical events and other events within the concert space. So yeah, thank you very much.
So, thanks, Garth, for the nice introduction of the project. Any questions from the audience? Yes, please.
You mentioned that with the speaker array, you're going to have some interaction
Yes.
options. I just wondered what they were.
Because we'll know where each individual is in the space, we'll be able to develop a number of approaches to looking at that, whether it's kind of flocking, whether it's where attention is being directed, because we'll also actually be able to get data about where they're looking in the space. And so I'm intending to use that data to both drive real-time synthesis of some of the layers of the sound field, and some of the animation parameters will be linked to some of that data as well. Because I'm making the work in reality next year, there's a lot of the final kind of process that I don't know yet. But there is a sense that I really want to make sure that people feel bound together as a community, and that they have a degree of agency about driving higher level parameters within the space that they don't have to think about consciously, but they kind of could perceive as they group together. For instance, certain colour, temperature changes and qualities like that, yeah. So in the same way that if we walk through a laneway, we hear the reverberation changing as we walk, but we're not consciously trying to make that happen.
And can I ask if you're using real-time synthesis because of the limitations of a sound field recording?
Yes, so ambisonics is always out there, and it's incredible and beautiful, but it's never right here. And so wave field allows me to bring a sonic object here, but even more enriching is the fact that I can pass the sonic object to you, and everybody perceives that, right? And so this sense that I can bring the sound into the space using wave field, and then when you combine that, and actually this man here introduced me to all of this, when you combine that sense of high order ambisonics to create this incredible immersive space, and then you're able to place an object so beautifully in the space. And in fact, at MPAC, we did some experiments where we even placed just sine tones in the space, and we got beating tones between them and all kinds of stuff. So the ability to really localize using wave field is something that's just not available in other forms.
Thank you.
Before I ask my original question, I'll kind of follow that one actually.
Okay.
Will body occlusion not be a problem with lots and lots of people with the wave field synthesis?
Yeah, yes and no. Yes and no.
Yeah, cool.
And maybe yes is good. I don't know. I mean, yes, definitely. If it depends where the array is hung, and whether we're running the wave field from above or on the side, or lots of things to consider there. But yes, probably there will be some occlusion, and that's a good thing because you're in an environment with other people, and you would expect there to be occlusion. Yeah.
That's cool. This is maybe diverging from the topic of the immersive futures, but like going back to the top end of your presentation and the acoustic ecology stuff.
Yes.
Have you done any long-term recording in ambisonics?
Yes.
And have you used visualization techniques for that? Because that would be really tough. And then to be able to do event detection.
Yes.
That's if you've got anything on that, it'd be really interesting.
I had a slide in here and took it out because I was worried about time. But yes, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours now, and we have a project where we have 5 recorders that record for 3 days at a time, and every 2 weeks we go and put fresh batteries and cards in them and record for another 3 days and so on. And we've been doing that for about a year. And then we've actually, over the summer, every 200 milliseconds analysed those files for 19 psychoacoustic coefficients, and then pulled the weather data at the same time. So we've actually built a model that shows us the correlations between the psychoacoustic properties of the environment and the current weather conditions. And so we're kind of looking at how do we describe the sound in the world and the impact of environmental factors upon the sound, and in fact, of course, then the way that can be seen to be a useful tool in terms of climate change prediction, because we're actually now able to feed it weather and ask it what it's going to sound like in 2 days' time, and it's remarkably accurate. So we're kind of trying to develop these tools using these long-term recordings that actually understand something about the environment itself.
So visualization's not in there? Yeah, because even on a mono recording, just looking at a 24-hour recording, you're just
Yeah.
like,
Oh, right, yeah, so at the moment, no, we're using the model to do things I would normally use visualization for in terms of looking for events or looking for transformations, and then we're graphing that data, so yeah, but,
Thank you
but
very
not in
much.
this kind of terms. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
yeah, pleasure.
So we have time for a very quick question, if one comes up. Yes, please.
Thanks for the wonderful presentation. I was just wondering, you mentioned that in a hyper-real technological mediation, you would like to create a private experience. How is that possible?
I think as soon as you put a head-mounted display on, you have a private experience. So actually, I think the opposite is the challenge, which is how do you put a head-mounted display on and have a communal experience? Right, so I think everybody has a private experience, even standing out here in the foyer. And then the challenge that we have in this work is that I want you as a community to engage with the environment you're in and perhaps to have some control over it, but at least to actually control is probably the lowest priority, but to be an agent in that environment and to actively engage the environment as a community, not just as an individual. But yes, my own perspective, and certainly it's widely argued, is that as soon as you put a head-mounted display on, you're in a private space, and so that for many people a challenge. But I think it's one that we can get around.
Okay, thanks again to Garth for this nice presentation on VR environments. So I would like to